very much. So we'll start recording now with your permission. Thank you. So allow me quickly on behalf of my colleague Evans from East Africa Philanthropy Network to introduce the session. And this is another online conversation that we are having around leadership. We started these conversations last year, and we continue these conversations in a small scale manner, but in a full scale in terms of knowledge sharing and knowledge into what we have as leaders. This, I think, is the second big one. And for us, this is a space whereby we believe us as leaders, we need to be able to talk together, share our experiences, but also find a common agenda in what is it that we need to have as leaders in the philanthropic sector to move this sector ahead. The main issue now is an impact to COVID. Every organization, every person, and especially the marginalized, have been impacted in different aspects, from the socio-economic, political, you name it. And what we have seen is that philanthropy support organizations their urgent needs, but also to support so I'm saying that the main issue here is the impact of, but more so in those who are vulnerable in the continent. And we have seen quickly the civil society organizations and philanthropy support organizations responding to the urgent needs of the community.
Wow, Stigmata, you're really breaking. You may need to turn off your video. The joys of technology.
Yeah.
Stigmata, you still there? She's gone, huh?
Back again.
Okay. Voila.
So what I was introducing the session in very powerful. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. So let me continue. What I'm saying is the effect of COVID has made us, most of the philanthropy support organizations and civil society organizations, quickly responding to the urgent needs of the community, and especially the vulnerable groups and the marginalized groups. But what we have also seen is that the result of our support has been the marginalized groups raising voice to demand for government actions which are more relevant to their cause. And yet the reality is that most of us, the philanthropy support organization and civil society organizations, may not even survive the fallout of COVID-19. So we think that this conversation is timely and it's important. And if you are if you are worried about your organizational resilience, like ourselves, some of us here, and if you wonder whether or not you have the right skills to build the resilience of your organization, and if you really want to be part of the conversation of all these leaders and thought leadership around how to build organizational resilience in the continent, then this is the right training for you. And believe me, you are in the right place. So we, Africa Philanthropy Network and East Africa Philanthropy Network, joined forces to organize this conversation today. And our key expectation is that by the end of this conversation, we have planned it for 2 hours. We can spend less than 2 hours. But by the end of this conversation, we will be able to at least provide an overview of leadership agility for organizational resilience. And we also expect specifically to add, to see you going away with additional knowledge about what leadership attributes you need to have for you to build the resilience back. But also what are the new leadership competencies you need to acquire to be able to build better after COVID, and to have more resilient organizations. But also what kind of institutional capabilities you need to have for you to survive the fallout after COVID. And importantly for us, as I've said at the beginning, this is a space for you to reflect on what capabilities do you have, what competencies do you have, what is required in your institution. And you're going to reflect together with your fellow leader colleagues in the sector. So 2-hour session, importantly, we have our sister professional, Taka Awori, who is the CEO of the Busara Africa, a Pan-Africa leadership development firm, who is going to lead the training today. She is the leadership trainer. She's the professional coach and organizational development specialist. Together with Taka, she'll be working with a sister colleague, Lydia Boateng Pobi, who will also support Taka to deliver the training today. My colleague, the CEO of East Africa Philanthropy Network, is going to do the wrap up and share a closing remark. And I don't want to take more of our time, because as I've said earlier, we have said 2 hours, but we can spend 1 hour. It's us, and this is our conversation, so it's our choice. I would really like to invite now, to ask you to join me to invite Taka, who is going now to lead the show. Taka, this is your show, and thank you for making time to share your expertise with us. Welcome.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. Asante sana, Dada. It's absolutely wonderful to join APN and EAPN and all others. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I recognize those of us from the continent are sitting in different spaces, different time zones, but we come together to talk about something that's very close to our hearts, and it's really the resilience of our organizations. So I'm supported today. I'm supported today with Lydia, my colleague, who's the program manager of Busara Africa. And I also saw one of our associates online, Daniel, who is also with us today. So he will also be part of our team. And I know Renatas is also going to be helping us to manage some of the muting. Again, I'm really encouraging you to keep an eye on your mute button, just so that we're able to have the space to have a really productive conversation. We're hoping that this will not be a one-way presentation, but it will really be a conversation. So I will present a few thoughts, and then we hope to, after some Q&A, have some time to go into smaller groups. So this is not a typical webinar where I come and talk at you for a little while. We have 2 rushed minutes to have Q&A, but I'm hoping this is really a space where we start to talk about, do we have the leadership to ensure that our organizations are resilient? So again, I'll present for a little bit. We'll have some Q&A. We'll then have breakout sessions for smaller group discussion. We'll come back in plenary feedback, and then we'll close out the conversation. You will see my slides are very much a summarized version. I have gotten always lots of feedback that too often I put too much on my slides, so I've tried to behave this time. So, but as Stigmata said right from the beginning, we will be sharing more detailed slides as handouts, but that's only to those who register. So you see Renatas has put the registration link on the chat. Please do register so we know who and how to send you the more detailed handouts, yeah? But okay, so without further ado, I will jump into the conversation, which in many respects Stigmata has laid the ground very much for in terms of what we hope to achieve. So as she mentioned, what we hope to achieve with this session, two things. Number one, that by the end of this session, all of you would feel that you have truly understood which leadership competencies drive organizational resilience. And second, you would also have a good understanding and knowledge about the organizational capabilities to strengthen resilience. So it's about leadership competencies and organizational capabilities. Those are the two areas we're hoping you would leave with real clarity about. But before I go any further, it's probably important that we are on the same page in terms of how we're understanding organizational resilience, because we're just throwing this word out, but maybe we have different understandings of the term. Denver 2017, Professor Denver describes organizational resilience as the ability of an organization to anticipate, prepare for, respond, and adapt to, it could be incremental change, or it could be sudden disruptions in order to survive. But note, this is a key word, but also to prosper. So this is a conversation about your organizations, not just keeping their heads above water, but also what does it take to ensure that your organizations can still prosper? And why are we talking about organizational resilience? And why does it matter more now than ever? I think one, we're recognizing that even before 2020, we were already living in a VUCA world. You know, volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity were a reality that many of us were getting used to. In other words, change, rapid change, VUCA change was in many respects becoming the norm for many of us. However, I think as Stigmata intimated, COVID in many respects was the game changer. COVID-19 in many respects was VUCA in action. But unfortunately, I think as we've all seen, COVID has been more than a health crisis. The socioeconomic impact has been devastating globally and particularly also on this continent. But the impact, I think, as many of us have seen with the partners we work with the communities we work with, is that the impact has been unequal. More than ever, I think what COVID has done is to bring very stark light the inequalities that so many of you have talked about, but which many of our governments and our key power holders have never really shifted. So the impact of COVID has shown us indeed why organizational resilience matters more than ever. But in addition, I think this is what, again, Stigmata was alluding to in this context where our work is needed more than ever to support communities, to advocate for government programs that are responsive to the unequal impact. We're finding what's the reality? That our organizations and the work that we do are under threat. And I think many of you are familiar with this recent Civicus report that showed that many of you within civil society, at least 89% of the respondents, say that the pandemic has negatively impacted their financial situation, and therefore not just their ability to do this very important work, but essentially their very existence. So this is why we're having this conversation about CSO resilience. Many of you are feeling the brunt of it. Now let's come back to, well, why leadership? I think what we're also recognizing, and this is why I'm approaching this, we could have had an entire learning and online webinar just about organizational resilience, but I thought, no, let's come at it from leadership. Why? Because we're finding a major determinant of whether your organization will be resilient enough to bounce forward in this VUCA world is your leadership. I've been too much as an OD practitioner, I've been too often involved in organizational development processes where leadership was the problem. And I've also been part of processes where when leadership was right, it's almost like you had the engine ready. You know, you had everything in place to then work on the organizational capabilities. So I think not just from an organizational perspective, but even within our communities, society, our nations, we're all recognizing that leadership matters. This is why we're coming at it from the perspective of your leadership will be a key determinant of whether your organization will be resilient in this new VUCA world. So I hope by now you are asking yourself the very important question about, do I have the leadership required to make my organization resilient? On many respects, am I the weak link because I don't have the necessary leadership? I haven't adjusted my leadership. I'm not offering the right type of leadership, because this level of self-awareness then opens the door to learning about what do I need to do to strengthen my leadership in order to develop the resilience of my organization. So let me start out by recognizing that the type of leadership that's needed in this moment to develop organizational resilience will not be the same as the leadership of the past or even the present. There will be some things that leaders will absolutely have to stop doing. There will be some enduring practices, in fairness, that will have to continue. But I think more importantly, and I think that's the subject of this conversation, there will be some new things that leaders will have to start doing. And that's what I want to focus on in this conversation. And do let me know if I start to break. I just saw a message saying my internet is unstable, so you can send me a chat. So what are these leadership competencies? And in a minute, I'm going to go through these 7. So it's disruptive leadership, network leadership, collaborative leadership, agile leadership, inclusive leadership, the ability to lead without a title, and all of this lying on a foundation of what I call tuned in leadership. So what I hope to do this morning is quickly go through what these 7 leadership competencies involve. And later, again, I'll go fairly quickly. You can always ask questions later afterwards. And again, the slides will have more details. And then afterwards, I will refer to the specific organizational capabilities. There are 3 of them. But for now, let me go through these 7 leadership competencies. So let's start with the foundation. And this foundation is what I'm calling tuned in leadership. And why does tuned in leadership matter? Essentially, tuned in leadership is the ability of a leader to consciously focus on that which is positive within themselves, others, and their environment. Now, why does this matter? 2020 has been a moment, I think, where for us as leaders, there's been no playbook, no guidebook, no tool. So many of us have had to make decisions without any guidance because many of us have faced things that no one has ever faced before. So more than ever, and not just 2020, I suspect it's going to continue for some years into the future. More than ever, as leaders, you will have to be able to tune into your inner guidance to help you decide what is the right course of action in this moment. Because nobody has faced this before. A lot of what we're learning is all new. So your ability to tune into your inner guidance becomes absolutely critical. At the same time, many of the people that you are working with will be doing things they have never done before. They'll be using skills, technological skills, ways of working remotely, things they haven't done before, and they may not do it so well. Many of them will be feeling anxious, stressed, so you might not be seeing the best in them. And yet, now, more than ever, as a leader, this is the moment to tune into the best of them, even in this difficult time, so that they can bring out the best in themselves. This is a moment where they're doubting themselves. This is a moment where you remember the best in them. So that's a bit about tuning into the best of them. In addition, if there's ever been a time, 2020, where talk about the news, the narrative has all been negative, negative, negative. And I think many of us who are either living in countries who are about to go through elections, or we're watching the US elections. So sometimes politics heightens the negativity of the narrative around us. Huh? But also, given what many of us are facing from a funding perspective, many of us have also tuned into stories of scarcity, limitation. So if we're not careful at the same time, the stories in our head, the stories that we're dealing with are all negative. And again, this is not the space from which you can bring out innovation, creativity to manage the new time. So this is why tuned in leadership is so critical at this moment. So you may be asking, well, Taka, so what does this mean in practice? What do I do? What do I do to display more tuned in leadership? And there's 6 things I'd like to recommend. Again, the more detailed list of them will be in the handouts. Please register if you haven't already. So the first thing you would do is, in terms of tuning in to that which is positive within yourself, is you find your own way of tuning into your higher self. Tuning into your higher self either through meditation, prayer, communing with nature. But that also means tuning out the negative voices in your head. This is about the emotional intelligence that's required of you as leaders so that you can provide the positivity to manage this current moment. In terms of others, it means tuning into the shared humanity and greatness of others and tuning out the bias and judgment of others. In terms of the external environment, it means tuning into positive stories, news, and narratives of possibility, and tuning out narratives of limitation and scarcity. So that's the tuned in leadership. Let me quickly move on to the next one. Disruptive leadership. Now, some of you will be familiar with this term, but many of you might be thinking, what is she talking about, disruptive leadership? Because for many of you, disruption and people who are disruptive, it's usually a negative term. Huh? But in this case, we're talking about disruptive leadership as the ability of a leader to challenge the status quo and rethink accepted ways of doing things in order to better achieve stated objectives. So this is not about changing for the sake of changing. This is about constantly changing in order to get better. This is about the ability to be a disruptor and not be the one who's being disrupted. This is about being the one who can bring about change and not always being a victim of change. So this is why this type of leadership becomes so critical. And how can you become more disruptive as a leader? Number 1, keep asking if there is a better way to do things. 2, expose yourself to new things, what you read, what you listen to, what you watch. Number 3, make time to pause and be still. And this one is so important because many of you are just so busy, doing. And yet, those disruptive ideas, those innovations often come to you when you're quiet, in those quiet, still moments. So it's important to make time for that. Number 4, be willing to be different. Disruption, as you can see in the photo I have here, the blue boat, it means that you may come out with an idea for doing things and everybody will be like, but no other organization is doing it that way. Or they'll be like, no other leader is doing it that way. So it means at times you will be different. And it also means that you will have to operate out of your comfort zone as you try out new things. And not all those new things you try out will work. So this also means to be disruptive, means also meaning getting comfortable with failure, both yourself and also within the organization. So that's the second, disruptive leadership. The third is networked leadership. And what I mean by that is the ability you have to have positive and mutually beneficial relationships with a wide range of people. I think more than ever, what we're recognizing during this moment in 2020 is that the quality of your relationships are those that enable you to be more resilient. And the quality of your relationships as a leader have a huge impact on the quality of the relationships that your organization has. So at this moment, it is often your relationships that will enable you to take advantage of potential opportunities. And later you will see I'll talk about collaboration as being an important attribute of leaders also at this moment. But all of that begins with having important and strategic networks. So how can you become more networked? A couple of things to keep in mind. Number one, maintain healthy relationships with existing networks by displaying integrity. Many of you are part of existing networks, APN, EAPN, maybe others, but your behavior in those networks are the types, how do I say it? They show you up to be people that are not necessarily trustworthy. And so therefore people much later may not want to work and collaborate with your organization. So when you display integrity, honor your word, do as you say you have done, walk the talk in your existing relationships, you're able then to leverage these relationships to ensure resilience of your organization. But also when I say networking, many of you will now imagine, hey, now when COVID is lifted, social distancing is lifted, you'll be at every cocktail party, every type of event now, sharing your card out very widely. And that's not what I'm talking about. Huh? It's really seeking to be of service, not just to use your networks. Huh? So pay attention to your social capital bank. Huh? I find those who have very powerful networks are those who have always been helpful first to others. So when there comes a moment when they have to ask others of something, they are not overdraft, you know, they don't have an extensive overdraft. Huh? They've not overdrawn on their social capital account. So start first to be of service with others. Stay in touch with old friends and colleagues. You never know who from there you can be of service to and collaborate with. Invest in social networks that enable you to expand beyond your comfort zone. Huh? It's so interesting how I notice many times existing networks are people who are very similar. Same socioeconomic class, same industry, same religion, went to the same. It's really saying, particularly at moments where, and I'll talk about this in a minute, where it's important how you are as an inclusive leader to look for networks, be part of networks, establish relationships beyond your usual groups, people who are just like you. And finally, be curious about other people. So always the emphasis is on others, not simply about you. And closely tied to network leadership is then collaborative leadership. So how do we leverage these relationships? And this comes through collaboration, which is needed. I think we've seen it more than ever at this moment. Huh? So collaborative leadership I'm defining as your ability to first internally create a culture of teamwork and then externally form strategic partnerships to achieve shared goals. Huh? Now, this is particularly important because I think what all of us have seen is that the complexity of the challenges we're facing at this moment will require more than our individual skills within organizations, more than a skill of one function. It's going to take a culture of collaboration within your organizations in order to respond to some of the adaptive challenges that this new VUCA world has started and has created. But that means you yourself as the leader have to model the way, you have to incentivize it, you need to create that organizational culture where collaboration is seen as a good thing, not everybody working in their silos. So that's internally. But externally, it also means constantly looking for others you can come together with. And I think that's something we've done quite well within civil society, but not just marriages of convenience. It's about strategic partnerships that enable us to seize opportunities. And I think we're seeing organizations that are more resilient are ones that are able to seize opportunities even in very constrained circumstances. So how can you become more collaborative as a leader? Internally, encourage and incentivize cross-functional teamwork. Externally, when developing strategic partnerships, always remember, clarify the compelling joint purpose, look for those with shared values. Again, we've seen many instances of people coming together, but clearly didn't have shared values, and we know how those end up. Look for diversity of skills, so that you're all bringing different things to the table. Be clear on expectations, particularly on ways of working, and start small. I often say, date before you get married. So don't get into some huge partnership. Start by doing little things together, co-hosting events together, and ultimately build trust. The next one is agile leadership, which again, many of you have probably heard quite a bit about, and what I'm defining as your ability to be nimble and flexible in thinking, being, and doing in order to provide the leadership required in the moment. Again, I think it's quite obvious why we need this more than ever. As a leader, there will be moments where you will need a particular leadership style. It's your ability to be agile and adjust your style. As a leader, there'll be moments where you need to think differently. Some of us may be thinking only in a particular way. So it's also flexibility in your thinking. So that agility that you have as a leader then enables your organization to also be a lot more nimble and adaptable in the face of change. I tell you, you can well imagine that it's very hard to find an organization that's agile and nimble if its leadership is not equally agile and nimble. So how can you become more agile? Keep asking, and this is the self-awareness, keep asking what type of leadership is required of you at the moment. 2, be curious. I tell you, if you'll talk about one of those key competencies that's needed at this moment more than ever as leaders, it's curiosity. Curiosity is an asset. Be curious, ask the right questions so that you're constantly learning and unlearning. There are many ways of doing things that you're currently doing as leaders that you gotta unlearn. Certain beliefs, things that you have that the new times are saying, this is no longer working. You need to unlearn that and start to do things differently. Again, I'll reiterate, be comfortable with being uncomfortable. This moment may ask you to do things that you haven't done before, and it'll mean you'll be uncomfortable. But even as you're agile, to ensure that you are not the type of leader who's just moving with the wind, your agility needs to have a certain degree of rootedness and centeredness. And this is why I talk being able to tune in. So remain rooted in your purpose and your values, so that even as you're being agile and adaptable in the how, you're still focused and committed to the purpose and your values. Inclusive leadership. This is about your ability to create organizations that enable diverse groups of people to bring their whole selves to work. And again, one of the things we're recognizing is that the organizations that will have the competitive advantage in this VUCA world are the diverse organizations. But not just diverse, inclusive, because I've seen many diverse organizations, but they're not inclusive. So you have lots of different types of people, but the culture is not inclusive of those different people. Those people don't feel that they're able to bring their whole selves to work. So that becomes critical for you as a leader to first be inclusive so that you can create an inclusive organization. So how do you do that? Number one, start by recognizing that you do have unconscious bias. Yes, you do. We all do. So first, the self-awareness again. Uncover your unconscious bias. Increase your exposure to people who are different from you. Many times it's the exposure that helps you realize, oh, actually, I do have that prejudice and unbiased. I need to do that. I need to address that. As you become more exposed to those who are different from you, really listen to their perspectives, how they're experiencing the organization, the world, and listen with an open and curious mind. Many times, many of us, again, the way our African societies can be quite judgmental, we come to experiencing the other with judgment. Oh, that's how you are. So this is really an invitation in terms of strengthening your inclusivity to increase your curiosity and openness-minded muscle. The other key aspect of becoming an inclusive leader is recognizing and understanding your privilege. Many would deny that they're privileged. They think privilege is left for the older men, or older white men. But it's recognizing all of us have some degree of privilege. Right now, I'm speaking to many who have positional leadership. That very position gives you a privilege. It's important to recognize that. Nothing wrong with it, but it's how you use your privilege. So understand your privilege and use it positively. How do you use it? To challenge unequal power relationships and systemic inequities in your organizations and in the communities and societies that you work in. And you do this by working with marginalized groups to address inequities and not by taking over. So you work without taking over, because I think that's another tendency we have, to just take over the whole agenda. And the final leadership competency is leading without a title. Now, what I mean by this is the ability to display leadership as influence rather than leadership as command and control. And this is important at this moment because more than ever, what our organizations need to be resilient is shared leadership. The answers about how our organizations need to respond to what we're facing, need to pivot and be nimble, will not always come from you or the senior management team. It may come from those who are at the front line, your assistants, the program officers, the drivers. Those are those who actually may have ideas, but they also need to feel that they can take leadership on bringing their ideas forward and potentially even implementing these ideas within their scope and within their function. But you need to model that. You need to model the idea that leadership is not just about positional leadership. Leadership is not just about do as I do because I have said and I'm the Oga at the top, I am the boss, I am the Mudusi. And it's more about how do we influence others to achieve a shared goal. So that matters internally, but it also matters externally if you're talking about collaboration and strategic partnerships with others. You will be influencing others to join you to do things. But you're not coming as, oh, do you know who my organization is? Do you know the kind of money that we have? Instead, you're coming in terms of, look, this is something that we have in common together. This is something that we can do together. So it's about building trust across boundaries. It's about inspiring confidence. It's about showing interest in and considering the welfare of others, and ultimately about the ability to make a compelling case for a shared agenda, particularly when you're looking at working with peer organizations. So those are the leadership competencies. Let me go very quickly. I've talked for much too long to the organizational resilience capabilities. There are only 3 of them. And then I'm going to open the floor to Q&A. So it's the ability to anticipate change, ability to cope with change, and the ability to adapt with change. And again, it will be very hard for your organizations to display these capabilities unless you, the leadership, have displayed the 7 competencies I just described before. But let me go through these 3 very quickly. So the first one, organizational ability to anticipate change, has sometimes been called as your organizational foresight. And that is essentially your ability as an organization to consistently, not just one-off when you're doing strategies, but to consistently identify emerging threats and future trends and prepare accordingly. And I think many of you have heard the quote, an issue ignored is a crisis invited. So how can you do this systematically in your organizations? One, create time and space for all staff, not just senior management, but all staff to talk about trends and emerging issues. So what are they seeing in the environment? What are they striking them has been changing over a period of time? So create time for that. Number two, use strategic questions to develop the skills of your staff to think critically about the future and potential changes. Because let's face it, in many respects, you will have to strengthen the capability and capacity of your team to think this way. It might not be immediately obvious. Many of us are so used to just dealing with what's in front of us, all the crises, the urgent issues. And this is slightly different thinking. This is thinking about trends. This is seeing what's coming up and then bringing that back to say, what does this mean for us? In fact, they call it outside-in thinking. Being able to relate the outside trends to say, what does that mean in terms of how we need to shift and change within the organization? So that's a capability and a muscle you would need to strengthen within the organization. But also, and luckily I see many of you doing this, it's also including futures thinking constantly in strategy development and review processes. I've seen a few organizations doing it, maybe not enough. But all of that is what it takes to strengthen your foresight. Then the ability to cope with change. And this is to a large degree what many of you have been dealing with since February 2020 with COVID. A lot of this is what is related to the crisis management, but it's really about your ability to stay centered in the midst of disruption while choosing how best to respond to change. So not rushing around like a chicken without an egg and just every crisis, but it's really that calm centering and saying we're staying on purpose. How do we choose not just to react, but to respond to change? So how do you do this? How do you better cope with change? One, and this is something, again, I've seen many of you do absolutely beautiful. But the first I would say is decide what the disruption or crisis means for your organization. Craft a narrative, a meaning that brings comfort and hope. So it's getting ahead of the narrative. The kinds of narratives I've heard about, yeah, this is tough, but maybe this is an opportunity for us to get stronger, more resilient. Those type of narratives. The second, which is obvious, and I think many of you did this year, is conducting a threat assessment of the kinds of real risks you are facing and mitigating those risks to the best that you can. Many of you developed a plan. I think that's always critical as part of coping with immediate change, a plan to respond to that plan. But again, what I saw many of you doing as well, which is critical as part of coping with change, is recognizing the emotional impact of change and establishing support systems to help people cope. So that's been key, and the best of you all have done that. And finally, it's about organizations who cope well with change are ones in which the leadership and all communicate openly, truthfully, and regularly to staff and other stakeholders. So I think all of us have found how important communication has been this year as we've responded to the crisis that COVID has brought on. And the final one is, okay, so, you know, the change has happened, the crisis is over. Now we recognize, look, it's here to stay. How do we adapt to this new world that we face ourselves in, but also recognizing that new world is constantly changing. So that's your organizational ability to adapt to change. And this is about the ability of your organization to have a culture, and this is really so much about organizational culture, that reflects constant renewal and regeneration in response to change. And again, I quote Benjamin Franklin, who said, when you're finished changing, you are finished. So it's recognizing that, do you have the type of organization that doesn't have change for one moment and says, okay, this is a change we have to do and then we're done. But rather, the recognizing that change within is constant. So how can you do that? Couple of things. Huh? Number one is, rather than being good at doing a few things, and I see some of you have really mastered doing a few things very well. You're really good at the advocacy, you're really good at the research, and nothing wrong with that. But it's saying, get better at learning how to do new things. Because more than ever, I find some organizations are absolutely brilliant at what they've been doing for the last 10 years, but they recognize that what they've been doing for the last 10 years is no longer relevant. So how do you get better at learning quickly how to do new things? That becomes an even more important capability than what you've been doing so well for the last 15, 20 years. Number two is use experiments and prototypes to test out new ways of doing things, and allow for failure. So you see, this is the connection again between the leadership competencies and the organizational capabilities. It's when you as a leader get comfortable with failure because of your agility, because of your willingness to be disruptive, it is then that your organization is able to deal with mini failures. Remember, we said not huge failures, but mini failures that you test out, experiments and prototypes. And more than ever, this is about learning. So this is about you elevating learning to a key organizational value. Adapting to change can't go without an organizational ability to constantly learn and get better. It's about leveraging diverse skills and multifunctional teams to address adaptive challenges. Again, you go back to the leadership competency around inclusion, the leadership competency around collaboration, because it's going to matter so much in your organization for your organization to adapt to change. And finally, the key change management principles that we've always used will continue to be relevant. Don't forget them, continue to use them. The participation, communication, involvement, all of that will continue to be relevant. Oh, so let me pause here. It's been quite a bit, and we can take some questions and answers. As Stigmata said, you're welcome. If you don't want to unmute yourself, you're so welcome to put your questions or your comments in the chat. Otherwise, kindly raise your hand and we will come to you. And then we can call you and then you can unmute yourself and we can hear from you. So the floor is open. Questions, comments, also feel free to use the chat. Yes, Irungu, I've been looking at you. I'm so happy to see you. Welcome, Irungu. Over to you.
Hi, Saka.
Hello, Irungu.
That was so great that actually I've spent all my time typing and tweeting. So I hope people are sharing this. And today is Shujaa Day in Kenya. It is Heroes Day. And I can't think of a better way of having this conversation among leaders. It's just wonderful. I'm resisting the temptation to fly to Accra, Ghana as we speak. Right? Let me just quickly point, just kind of one thing that struck me, which is really powerful. You know, the Alcoholics Anonymous have a phrase that says, you know, that they have these 12 principles. And without belittling or just, in fact, just raising up the power of Alcoholics Anonymous and bringing it into this space, I think there's a wonderful phrase. They say, you know, and I'm going to paraphrase it. I think this would be a great way to think about issues. We are powerless over international aid addiction, and our organizations have become unmanageable. The second principle, paraphrase, something like this: we have to believe that the work of shifting power is greater than NGOs, and that this could restore us to sanity. Having a political awakening as a result of these steps, we must carry this message to all citizens and practice these principles in our organizations. And I think anybody who's familiar with the AA 12 steps would value this adaptation. I think for me, the thing that's really interesting about your point is really this issue about, you know, it is not from knowledge that the real change happens, it is from imagination. And I think your comment about how do we remain curious, the more sophisticated, the more analytical we get with our experience, really remaining in this space that it actually has nothing to do with knowledge. It has everything to do with imagination, is what I've got from this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you, Irungu. And thank you for bringing it back to the power analysis, the need for us to use our positions to shift, to work in alliance with others to shift power, but also bringing it back to the issue of the curiosity because of the power of the imagination. And therefore also the level of unlearning. I'm constantly struck by how much this moment is inviting us not just to unlearn, sorry, not just to learn, but to unlearn so we can invite in new possibilities. Because so many of us have so much baggage from the past that is preventing us from seeing anew and creating and imagining these new worlds where power is shared more equitably. Thank you. Robert, I see Robert's hand up. Robert, over to you.
Hello, Taka. Good morning to you from Accra. And Irungu, I'm waiting for Accra. I'm at the airport. So it's nice to hear from you again. And of course, I think that this topic has been amazing. I joined in the middle of the presentation, but I was really struck by some of the things around change and the need for change, especially for some of us whose organization globally is going through a heavy change at Amnesty. And for us in the country offices, the idea of how the bigger part is moving and how we want to move along with it. So if you could share from your experience working with the international organization where there is a global change of the organization and which needs to trickle down onto the country offices. How does one who's leading like a country office able to get into the change that is happening at the global level and disseminate it into the country office staff? Because of course, the global office needs to do their job well to get you, changed, to be able to change the others. So how would you share some experience with us on these kind of things where there's a bigger change, where you're a little part of it, but you lead a little part of it? It could be a bigger organization with a department and you're changing and you need to change along with it. What are some of the things that you need to note so that as you're going forward, you can lead the change that is needed?
Great, thank you so much for that question, Robert. Very, very thoughtful question. And I'll speak from my own experience, but I think I can see many of you on the call who've probably been part of similar processes. But I think the time I felt this in many respects, but I think the time I felt it most potently was when I was the country director at ActionAid Ghana. And that was the moment when ActionAid was starting out the internationalization process. Irungu, we were part of that same journey together at that time. And what I took from my role as country director as part of leading change in Ghana, but being part of a broader global change process, but what I've seen working as an OD consultant with other organizations is first, Robert, I would say is, define what that change for you means locally. Really get crystal clear on how do we use the changes globally to be even more impactful on the communities that we work with. Because I think sometimes we can get so busy with all these organizational changes, we forget that this is ultimately in service of a particular constituency and group of people. So first get clear on what does this change mean? How do we need to change in order to serve better locally? And what do we need to do different locally? So be crystal clear on what that change is locally so that there is true ownership locally, so that you are not passive recipients of a global headquarters change. The second thing is about influencing up. I find many times changes can be determined on top without a clear understanding of what it means at the front line, without a clear understanding what it means for those who are actually doing the changes and are having the interface with those that matter the most. So as you are seeing ways that need to change, whether it's changing the way things are happening within the global organization, within corporate headquarters, within the way change is being rolled out, please, please don't be passive recipients of that, but constantly keep advocating for both better ways of bringing about the change, but also a better vision for what needs to change. So those would be the two things I would say, Robert. But thank you for that question. If others have to add on, please put that in the chat. I know some of you are shy, eh? You don't want to unmute and show your faces, eh? So please use the chat. Please use the chat. Ooh, I see Nana on there. Thank you, Robert. Nana, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Saka, for a brilliant presentation as always. What you said about adapting to the new world struck me as one of the major challenges that we have. Perhaps not only adapting to the new world, but just adapting, the regeneration and the renewal. The challenge being that we do have a fear of failure, and there's no space to just try out things that could fail. Because perhaps you don't have the resourcing. I mean, the kind of resourcing that we get doesn't even give you space to just, you know, do things and try things. And so that is one of the areas that I think we do need to really look at as we talk about African philanthropy and even the global, looking at the support that we all get from the work that we do, and creating that space for us to grow, do new things, have the space to fail and learn from failures and also the successes. So I think that is one of the challenges that we have, and it's not an easy thing. So I thought I would just raise
powerful.
that as well.
Yes. Oh, thank you, Nana. So powerful. And Nana, you talked about it even from the organizational level, but I think this thing about failure starts much earlier in terms of how so many of us have been socialized. I remember speaking to someone who told me that she had gone to university out in California. I think she was in Silicon Valley, yeah? And a lot of her classmates, particularly I think she was doing a master's, a lot of her classmates were coming from Silicon Valley startups that, you know, had done well, had failed. So people would say with pride, oh my gosh, you know, I had a 30 million business that absolutely failed, it went bust. And they said it with pride, because for them, their whole idea was like, you started, it failed, but you learned. But for many of us, it indeed has been embedded straight through these big exams we take in our educational process that failure is a bad thing. So it is deeply embedded in our psyche that failure is bad. And then, as you said, you bring it to the organizational level where funding doesn't usually give us the space to do that. But I think recognizing these challenges, two things that I think increasingly funders can give more room for people to experiment. You're not giving them room to fail, but to experiment and respond differently when things don't go as planned. So moving away from monitoring and evaluation, that's all about ticking boxes. As did you meet all the log frame outputs and outcomes, but rather focusing on what have we learned from this and starting small enough so that the consequences of things not working out are not so huge. So these smaller prototypes and experiments, but brilliant point, Nana. Thank you, thank you. Okay, we can probably take about one more. Anybody else?
Hello.
Hello, Rose. Go right ahead.
Hey, thank you for that beautiful session. It's so inspiring. Coming from the CSO community, I do appreciate the fact that we have limited resources to merely survive and pay for staffing and pay for utilities. And at times you are consumed by the daily survival of the organization itself and to maintain the mission. The beautiful picture you painted about leadership, of course, that sometimes they acquired, but sometimes you need to sit in a classroom. And at times it needs conscious effort to invest in that because some CSOs don't have that capability or the luxury to invest into the leadership. But at times also looking at the competences for the organization to change, you sometimes don't have that time to do the to anticipate what happens in the future. You are there to save the people. You want to do, you are working on human rights at the community. You are consumed by issues. You are overwhelmed by the challenges that are coming along. And the donors don't give you money to invest in such scenarios or situations. And COVID has really exposed such CSOs. Like you alluded to earlier, they were not even talking about maintaining the purpose of the organization, but their main survival. So how do they deal with this situation going forward, considering the scarcity of the resources, considering human resources challenges, and what have you in the CSO community?
Thank you, Rose. And thank you for reminding us of some of the real constraints and hardships many organizations are facing. Now, Rose, I want you to note how you felt when you talked about those limitations and constraints.
Emotional.
But it's more than negative emotions, isn't it? It's the sense of,
yeah.
It's like a depression and a sense of overwhelm, a sense of, So this is the back to the tuning in. And this is why I believe the tuning in is so important. What's required of our organizations right now means that we have to come from a space of possibility and hope, despite the constraints that we're facing. It's about an intentional choice to tune out, even in the face of dealing with, oh my gosh, where am I going to get that salary? Oh my gosh, this funding has just ended. But making a conscious choice to tune in instead to narratives of possibility. So it's saying that, yes, we recognize that they are constraints, but yes, I also, if I started now to ask you all to give me narratives of amazing things each of you have done with very little resources, if I started now to ask you examples of how CSOs have stood tall where government has not been able to actually address many of the gaps that our constituents and those we work with, our communities need, where CSOs have stood tall, many of you could tell me those stories. So Rose, I would say that this is about, as leaders, choosing to tune in to stories and narratives of possibilities, choosing to focus on the assets that you have, not the ones you don't have, choosing to focus on what you can do, the innovation you can with those limited resources, which is easier, I know, always said than done, but it's the invitation at this moment. You talked about the constraints of some of the leadership or the leadership we have in some organizations. And I think it's also important to highlight that leadership in organizations is not always positional. So many of you may not be the CEO, you may not be the ED, but it's saying that despite the fact that you are not having that role at the top, how do you still influence without a title to ensure that your organization is doing what it needs to do to strengthen its resilience? But thank you for that, Rose.
Tucker.
Yes, Evans. I think this will be the last one.
Yes, and mine is not a question. I wanted to request that we enable the chat, do I call it a box or section?
Oh my goodness, I hadn't realized you are unable to, you are not able to put things into the chat. I think Renat did. Are people able to put things in the chat? I had seen something in the chat.
Yes. Unless for administrators.
Feedback on the chat also.
Ah, okay. Oh, wow. All right. Well, I will sort that out when I come from, maybe we'll do the breakout rooms now, and then we'll sort that out. Oh, thank you for alerting me to that.
Taka, it's done.
Okay.
Somebody has managed to enable it.
Ah, thank you. Do you see why you need all these heads working together? Always works beautifully. Thank you. So as I mentioned, we really want to make sure this is a conversation, that it's not just, you know, I always find plenary spaces can sometimes be not as inclusive for everyone. So we would invite you, and I'm going to now invite Lydia to take us through questions for a breakout session where really you have an opportunity to reflect on your own leadership and organizational capabilities. And as she's about to share her screen with the questions, can I invite you all to get your phones so you can do a screenshot of the questions, because right after she goes through the questions, we will put you into groups. So please have your phones ready so that you can take a photo of the questions, a summary of the leadership capabilities and the leadership competencies and the organizational capabilities. Lydia? Great. Lydia, you're on mute. Over to you. You're still on mute.
Okay, so thank you, Taka, for such a great presentation. So for our breakout session, we are going to look at a number of questions. First of all, we want you to take a screenshot so you have the questions handy. And then if you could appoint a rapporteur who will feed back to the general group afterwards. What we are going to discuss is which of these 7 leadership competencies do you as an individual or your organization, you as an individual struggle with, or the people in your organization struggle with, and which of them is easier for you as an individual or your colleagues? Also, as an organization, which of the 3 capabilities do you struggle with or are you more comfortable with? Then we would also look at what you would like to do differently. So based on what you have heard this morning, afternoon, or evening, what would you like to do differently moving forward? And then we also want to anticipate, as we have been discussing, what are some of the challenges that you are likely to face when competency or you decide to pick up this competency? So basically, these are the questions. Taka will put us into groups, and then in the group, we would have this discussion. We will try and put the questions as well in the chat for you, but we want you to also take photos of the next slide, which is a summary of the competencies, the leadership competencies. If you can take a picture of this one as well. Then we also take a picture of the organizational capabilities, just to serve as a guide to us as we go into the breakout sessions.
Great. Okay, thank you, Lydia. So I'm about to open up all the rooms. You'll have 15 minutes. I've tried to keep the groups quite... Yes, please. Yes, please. I heard a voice. Evans, yes,
yeah,
please.
This is Evans. I'm trying to reach Lydia. Please kindly tell Lydia to remove the Juanito somebody.
Oh, yes, we just did. I did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. All right, so I'm opening up the rooms. The rooms are quite small, but you'll just have 15 minutes. But hopefully you shouldn't be more than 5 or 6 in the rooms. Don't forget to have a repertoire, and we will see you back shortly. So please head to your rooms as you see the instructions. Jemima?
Hello, Taka.
Hi, you're back, eh?
I'm back from group
Great.
3. So if I
Okay.
could go to any other group.
Let me see. There's somebody who's not joined. I see the latter groups a bit. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Fortunata. Let's see. I'm still just assigning those who are not assigned before.
At all, okay.
Yeah. So how do I check? Let's see who is here. Fortunata. Fortunata? Okay, let me move her to, no, she's just not. Okay, 4 does not have very many people. Let me send. Okay.
But 3, there were only 3 when I was leaving.
Yeah,
The
you're
group
right.
3.
Okay. So I will, I'll keep an eye. I didn't realize the thing about the chat.
Yeah, I was also surprised because I was using it.
It's because you are a co-host.
Oh, interesting.
That's what they were saying. That's what they were saying. So I think someone was able to, we have to, I wonder, let me just keep an eye. Okay, nobody's here now, huh? Oh, what's up? Fortunata?
Fortunata.
Fortunata? Hello? Maybe she's having challenges. She's to be in group 4.
Okay.
So I shortened the time. So let's see. You see, you heard that message, eh? So there is somebody, remember this thing, who Zoom bombs people.
Oh no.
So I was sent a private message.
To
That's
remove the person.
Yeah, but I, very quickly, I just put them in the waiting room.
Oh, okay.
But I don't, how does it work? I don't see because the waiting room, once you put in the waiting room, they can't come back in, right?
I think so, until they are admitted.
Because the waiting room is open. I'm not open. How do I put it?
And then,
it's disabled.
oh, okay.
So I don't know. The name was Juanito Alberto.
Oh, okay.
So please keep an eye. That's what Evans was trying to tell you.
Okay.
Because he thought that you would thing it for us.
Oh, no, I didn't
but
realize.
No, because you hadn't seen the message.
Yeah.
It was just sent to me.
Okay.
Okay, we have a good turnout. I wonder, okay, great, Stigmata is back. Stigmata?
The internet is really killing me.
Sorry, sorry.
Yeah, so I don't know which group I was again. Where Page is. Just check Page Amonde.
Page, eh?
And we started our discussion very well.
Page Omondi. Oh, there she is. Breakout room 1. Okay. All right. Sending you there now. Eh?
Thank you, love.
Have you seen the thing? Great. Okay. All my old friends. Irungu and I have been friends for almost, how long? 20 years. Lydia, have you gone? Hey, Lydia.
I'm here.
No.
Hello.
Hi.
20 years.
Oh, yes, I've known Irungu forever. One second, let me put on this fan. You see how hot I am? Yeah, almost 20 years.
Wow.
I know, so nice. So nice. Okay, so, hey, we only have 6 minutes more. Could that be possible?
Yeah. Yes. Because when I went to the group and I was about leaving, there were 13 minutes. They had like 13 minutes left.
Okay. Oh, okay. Nana dropped. Hi, Nana.
I went off.
Oh, sorry.
I'm in between meetings, so I went out and.
Oh, so you were never with a group, eh?
No, I got into the group and then the connection went off. So
okay. Who are you? No worries. Who do you remember who was in the group with you?
I'm in Susan's group, Susananda.
Oh, I see. Okay, Susan. Okay, you are in group 6. All right, darling. Let me send you. Huh?
Okay, thank you.
Okay, welcome. Thanks for your question.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so when they come back, Because there's so many groups, I really wanted the groups to be small. I have 7 groups.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll say we may not be able to hear from all the groups. I will see how far we can go until, we need to save time to get the volunteers for the tool.
For the,
yeah. And maybe when I'm asking for the tool, if you can share the competencies.
Okay.
The competence, the leadership competencies, and the organizational ones.
Okay.
I'll make sure.
It should just be on the screen.
Yeah, I'll tell you when to put it up.
Okay.
Because I'll tell people, have a look. Oh, Milagre. Hello, Milagre. I see, maybe I'm not seeing him in the list. I don't understand. Yeah, I'll tell you when. I think the key thing for me is to keep an eye that at least 5 minutes to 10 or 5 minutes to, I will ask people.
Okay.
Yeah. Catherine. Hello, Catherine.
Hi, I got bumped off.
Oh, sorry. Who are you with?
No, I've not even gotten to the breakout rooms yet, but it's okay. I'm with EAPN.
Oh, I see. Okay, okay. And they're about to come back soon.
Okay.
Within 3 minutes.
Let me just wait.
Sawa.
I missed a good discussion.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, okay. I think my internet just had issues. I'm somewhere on Waiyaki Way. If you know Kenya.
Oh, yes, I know Waiyaki Way. Oh, Paul.
Yeah, so they're constructing the road. The power keeps going off. Anyway, yeah.
Paul. Okay. They'll come back within like 2 minutes. They'll be back, eh?
No problem. I'll wait. Yes.
Sawa.
All right.
Okay,
I hope I still stay on. All
right. Okay, thanks.
Taka, so what time would you want me to put on the competencies? Is it when they are feeding back?
No, when I'm asking about the tool. The case study. Yeah. Okay. Oh, sorry, lady, I should have paused the recording.
Okay.
Okay, people are coming back now. Daniel, welcome back.
Thank you very much.
I hope you guys had a good discussion.
Yes, we did.
Excellent.
Interesting discussion.
Excellent.
Michael has volunteered to speak for us, so.
Okay. Look at Susan.
Yeah. To finish everything in that minute. Like,
was unfair.
Forceful eviction.
We needed
full eviction.
It's more than an exam, and they're telling you have 1 minute left.
I was supposed to alert you all before.
and immediately it is 20 seconds.
You did. We saw it, and then we saw the countdown, and it was just too late. I think Nana got cut off mid-sentence.
Welcome back, and forgive. I always say this is the facilitator's best tool ever created. Because I know some of you, you'll be discussing till next year. And then I would be late and I have to make sure you all leave. By 1 o'clock GMT, I have to make sure we're done. So please forgive me. I know you could have spent so much more time. I'm hoping you consider that an appetizer for continued conversation. Again, forgive me if you were caught, we call it the forcible eviction halfway, but it would be fantastic to just hear some highlights of your conversation. We may not be able to hear back from all the groups. We created a lot of groups so that you'd be fewer, but maybe a few people can share what the highlights were. And some of the rapporteurs can also put the feedback in the chat. Let's also use the chat. But let's hear from a few of you. How did it go? Feedback. Who was feeding back from group? You probably don't even remember your group number. So anybody, let's begin.
I can go. My camera is on, and this is what got me to be nominated.
Thank you, Chilande.
This mistake that I keep doing all the time. Well, I was in a nice, small, intimate group with Ese and Milagre, and we had a really good, fantastic conversation, of course, cut off early, but we did manage to get some good conversations going. In terms of the leadership skills, one of the things, I think majority of us felt that one of the easiest one that comes to us naturally is the collaborative leadership. It's very easy for most of us to sort of rally everybody else together with us. We also found networking and staying tuned in for some of us to be easy. We do have some people who consider themselves connectors, people who like to research, put your finger on the pulse all the time, watch people, learn what is coming out from what you're observing. The things that we found, the skill that we found a little bit tricky is the disruptive leadership skills that calls for a lot of bravery. And bravery and trust from those you're disrupting, which is not always easily won. Especially when you go into a space where you're being judged, you're being put in a box on very specific issues or places. So disruptive was one of those that we struggled with. There was also agility a little bit, not too much of a struggle, but it's always, we recognize that it can be tricky to be agile when you're trying to be collaborative and inclusive. And so some red tapes might come in there, and that can present us with challenges. The other piece we discussed just before we were cut off was the capabilities. And where we said we do sometimes struggle with anticipating change, especially in these times. COVID was nothing. The effects of it, we saw it coming, but the effects of it, I think most of us did not quite appreciate what it would mean. Nobody anticipated a whole lockdown, global lockdown like this. So that has really tested our abilities to cope. Abilities to cope was also a challenge for us, especially where some of us have found it exhausting to manage all the range of emotions from all these different corners, temper tantrums from some people, and having to serve many masters almost, everybody needs their attention, everyone wants to be addressed. And then adaptability are also a little bit tricky because again of those different perceptions and appreciation of what is a sense of urgency. Not everyone is always aligned with you. And so that has presented us with problems. But then on the converse also, some of us have found our ability to adapt to be very easy, especially where everybody that you're working with is aligned to the same goal, the same mission, and you're working together towards the same purpose. So there we go. SN Milagre, I hope I represented you well.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chilande. Really useful. Thank you. Keep that video on. Thank you. Okay, nice. Who else would like to feed back from their group?
Hello, this is Gloria.
Yes, go ahead, Gloria.
Yeah, what Chilande said is just the same as ours. But I got one which was interesting because of the country, without title. Now, he says that sometimes, like Tanzania, we have something called the Uja, whereby you have work with what the country says, and that is what I found very interesting. So it is more than just the organization itself. Okay, Others we just saw about the capabilities because of COVID-19 came up and people did not foresee it. So it forced them to talk to them. It taught them something else, okay? And the one who was on top management, how to think about it is different from what the bottom management thought of what they need to do. It's from different levels. I was the only one here because it depends on background. And I found mostly things like networking, because I'm a person in a background whereby I read and I do more of creativity. So I find like networking or doing other things, something new to me. So it also goes with what do you do, okay, as a background, because most of my group people are leaders in big organizations. They deal with big people or people such that they can be able to network and also find people and many things like that. I think I've said part and adding up to Chilande's. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Gloria, for that feedback. It's always interesting, again, to see what you're finding, what's fairly easy and people are doing quite naturally, and what we're struggling with. As you will see, Stigmata has put in the chat, one of the things we would like to do coming out of this conversation is to develop a tool with concrete examples of how you as leaders have been able to display these competencies and the organizational capabilities. So as we are speaking, we're really inviting you to just put in the chat the ones that you feel you're quite comfortable with, that you've done fairly well, because we'd like to learn more from you, because it's different. Some people find one thing easy, some people find another one quite difficult. So put on the chat what you're comfortable with, and later we'll pick up a conversation with you around that. But let's continue to have the feedback. So thank you. We've had Chilande, we've had Gloria. Who else is feeding back? We had 7 groups. Who else is feeding
hi,
back?
this is Wanjiru.
Yes, please, Wanjiru, go right ahead.
Yes, I forget the group number. I have no idea what group I was in. But my members were Evans, Sarah, Irungo, Bernadette, yes, I think, and myself. So the general feedback was most of us struggle with disruptive leadership because, you know, it's new, it's challenging the norms, and, you know, just struggling with, you know, finding new things, you know, that will sit well with people. That seemed to be, you know, the consensus from our group. Network leadership, collaborative leadership was quite, came naturally or came much easier to most of the group members. The challenges would be, you know, challenging the status quo, again, coming from disruptive leadership, challenges of delegation and figuring out how to delegate some tasks without pushing people or without, you know, with figuring out how to delegate amidst this disruption, right? And the last one was trying to keep the network and growing the networks, you know, post-COVID, and what that would look like. That was primarily the feedback from my group.
Brilliant. Thank you, Wanjiru. You had a very powerful group there. Really interesting. You know what's striking me as I'm listening to the feedback is how often disruption and disruptive leadership is coming up as one of those areas that we're struggling with. And it's not surprising me because it's hard, because I think, again, many of us have been socialized.
I think she...
Can you hear me? My internet was unstable for a bit. Am I okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yes, you're okay.
Brilliant. I was saying how I've noted how disruptive leadership is coming up as one of those challenging areas. On one hand, I'm not surprised, because I think many of us in the cultures we've grown up with have been socialized to you know, to remain within, to draw within the line type thing. However, where it does surprise me is going back to the point Irungu made about the type of shifts in power that many of us are trying to bring about in many respects, the work that we're doing is seeking to cause disruption. Disruption in how resources are allocated, disruption in terms of who has voice, disruption in terms of how funding happens, disruption in terms of who calls the rules of the game. So in many respects, as we seek to cause disruption in our external environment for the benefit of our key stakeholders in the communities, it's an invitation for us and our organizations to be disruptive and deal with those challenges that we face and what it means to be different and do things in a different way. But really interesting. Thank you. All right. So some other feedback. So we've had from Chilande, Gloria, Wanjiru. Who else would like to share some highlights from their groups? We've only heard from a few groups.
Dennis Moredi.
Go ahead, Dennis.
Yes, my name is Dennis Moredi from House Foundation. My group was Group 1. We had Stigmata, PH, Yawa, and I. And from our deliberations, it was clear that collaborative and networked competencies were the most comfortable for most members of the group. The challenges were in terms of disruptive and agile competencies. For some, tuned in competencies was also one of the challenge. And then in terms of organizational challenges, we had adoption to change as one of the challenges, and also the ability to anticipate change, which was the most prevalent problem among most of the group members. And then what we saw we'll do best differently to address these challenges was, one, to become aware of our weaknesses and also try to address them, especially what we are not good at. Instead of fearing to venture into those areas, try and seek people who are good at these areas and see how we can best incorporate them in our leadership.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dennis. You had a large group there, but really, really some thoughtful perspectives. Huh? It's interesting. What's coming up again is we're all struggling with this idea of anticipating change. And let's also be fair on ourselves. Nobody could ever have anticipated the level of change that COVID brought about. Huh? So it's also being quite fair and realistic. But it's also recognizing that futures thinking and anticipating change is not about correctly predicting the future, but it's rather about analyzing, based on current trends, future possibilities. So it's really been saying these are different scenarios that could take place in the future. And then again, the external inward thinking, it's then saying, and therefore, should any of these scenarios take place, this is how we will prepare for it so that we can respond, not just react, so that we can take advantage of opportunities, so that we can be agile. So it's not about necessarily predicting the future exactly, but really nice. I saw there was a question in the thing about, from Milagre's group, wondering about the rules or ways of being disruptive in situations of armed conflict. Really fascinating question. Huh? One thing that comes to mind is that many situations of armed conflict, or what I would refer to as peace building, opportunities for peace building, we see parties being so stuck in ways of doing things, in an impasse, that often what's required is disruption and different ways of including diverse voices in peace building. So if more than anything, one does need disruption to say, look, if we're going to get beyond what's keeping the parties stuck in this conflict, we need to disrupt the thinking. so that we have different ways of bringing people together for peace. Please continue to volunteer yourself for a case study. If there's one area you feel either your organization or you yourself are quite strong in any of the competencies. Nice, thank you. Please continue to indicate it in the chat. Okay, so we've heard from at least 4 of the groups. Let's hear from a few more before we will close out this session. Any others? Let your voices be heard. We don't want to close the session when we haven't heard highlights from the groups. I'm seeing people on here. Bernadette, was your group covered?
Yes, it was covered. Thank you.
Okay. Nassim, was your group covered? I'm not hearing Nassim.
Okay, let me speak for Nassim's group. I haven't heard him either or her.
Okay, thank you, Nana.
I got out of the group and got back in, so I was hoping that somebody who was there throughout might speak. But a number of things came up. Disruption clearly was one. The other one was agility, because of the challenges of doing new things, as we had mentioned before. And then the organizational challenges, we also had adapting to new things. Again, because of the challenges of not being in the position where you can just try out new things when you want to try them. And one of us mentioned the fact that she had a major challenge with adapting to this new era of social media and how to really use it effectively and all of that. So yeah, those were the 2 main things that we talked
Brilliant,
about.
brilliant. Thank you, Nana. Again, we're seeing so much learning and consistency across that, around this disruptive leadership and how that, and agility, how that continues to be a challenge. And learning, you know, the whole thing of learning new things and how that also becomes quite, you know, not an easy one at all. And yet again, reminding us all that often we can start small. Sometimes we don't need the funding to try out new ways of doing things. Yeah, but thank you for that feedback. We can probably take one more. We've had 5 groups. We're doing quite well. Any other group? If your group, don't feel bad if you're speaking for the group and you are not officially appointed, because some of you didn't have a chance to identify who would be in the groups. Faith, go right ahead.
No, my group already spoke. I raised my hand by
okay.
mistake.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Okay, any others? If your group has not been represented, one more minute. Okay. Okay, I'm looking at, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Omera is asking in the chat, in situations of long-serving organizational leaders or even founders, the other team members, newer junior staff will always feel intimidated. Ah, yes. How does one go around this? How do we ensure that you have voice even though you may not be the one at the head and the head is a founder or one who's been there forever? There's a couple of things that come to mind. Part of influencing without a title is a message that is not just for those of you who have titles. It's also a message for those of you who don't have titles and need to influence sideways and upwards. So it's about how do the more junior staff influence up but leverage collaboration. Because when you're influencing up, many times you can't speak alone because there may be consequences for speaking. Yeah? So how do you bring your voices together to influence the one who is at the top? And you do that from a perspective of really trying to understand what is the one at the top trying to achieve? What's their value system? And how do we make the case for doing things differently? Many of you are brilliant at advocacy out there. It's about bringing that same level of advocacy skills internally, where you recognize it's not about working alone, it's about collaboration, it's about a collective voice to influence upwards. But that change does start within. I think our organizations need to reflect the changes we want to see in society. Otherwise, constantly, I think we are undermined. Our message is undermined by the example of our organizations. So the way we lead has to be a model of what we want to see in society. Okay. All right, I'm going to pause now. Once again, thank you all. You've been absolutely amazing. I wish we could have continued this conversation forever. Thank you so much to those of you who have indicated that you have a particular comfort or ease with some of these competencies or capabilities. As Stigmata indicated in the chat, the next step for us in this work is to work together with APN and EAPN to develop this guide that really fleshes out. As you can see, many of these things are nice to say, hard to practice. So it's really a guide that provides you with support when you start to practice this with live examples. Too many of the guides we have are with examples from the West. This time, we want examples from you all. So thank you so much for those of you who have indicated that you do have a strength in this area. We will probably be in touch with you. So through APN or EAPN, we'll be in touch with you to just elaborate a little bit more on those examples so we can include it in the tool. But thanks so much again. Let me hand back over to Stigmata and Evans to close us out.
Thank you, Taka. Join me to really thank Taka for a wonderful presentation. Thank you, sis. This is the talk between Africans, and it's our own talk amongst Africans, between Africans, and the need for enhancing leadership for the sector cannot be overemphasized if we really need to reclaim this space. And one of the African philanthropic model that need to be claimed is an asset, which is the intellectual asset in most of us here today. This is normally and often neglected. We really need to bring these conversations oftentimes and see how we can really realize and bring more scholarship around the leadership for the sector. We don't have as many leaders in the sector because such conversations are not taking place and people are shying away from taking leadership position in the sector. They easily become co-opted in other sectors of development, and we keep on losing an important asset for the sector. So I think this is an ongoing conversation for us, and I don't need to ruin the show because my neighbor brother Evans, who we started this journey together last year, is the one who is going to take us to the end of the conversation and promise us on what is it that we'll continue to be doing together. But we are in for it, and we really need and seek your commitment to collective collaboration and networking to ensure that we have stronger leadership for the sector. Otherwise, we're all going to fall out. Evans, welcome, my dear neighbor brother.
Thank you so much, Director. And thank you so much, Taka, for that wonderful session. I want to start from where Stigmata stopped and say that last year, we started this journey and we had a leadership session that brought together members of the various networks of EAPN, APN, and we were looking at how do we define a leadership we want to see within the philanthropy field. And it's interesting that at that point, we had not anticipated seeing the situation that we are having today. And we looked at three things in that session that we had. And one of them was around leading self, and the attribute that really caught my attention as Taka was going through was the adaptable attitude. And the second thing that we looked at was leading others. And we really looked deeply into how do we lead without discrimination and abuse of power. And then we went to the third pillar where we were looking at leading organizations. And we looked at driving results and strategic thinking and acting. And then we came to the session that we are having today. And we talked so much about the tuned in leadership, the disruptive leadership, networked leadership, collaborative, and all those that we had a look at today. And we are saying that, as the saying goes, that leadership is a journey, and a journey which is a very long one. And when you stop learning, then you stop being a useful leader. And that's why I want to join my colleagues, Stigmata and Taaka, in saying that as EAPN and APN at the continental level, local level, regional levels, we appreciate the challenges that we are facing as a sector. As everyone was presenting their views around the discussion we had, you could see a lot of struggles around disruptive thinking. You could see people not struggling with networking leadership, collaborative leadership. But then there are others who are really struggling with the same. And that is where our commitment is coming in, that we've taken a responsibility of ensuring that as a sector, as leaders within the space that we are serving, we will continue to support these conversations that we are having today and look into developing a tool which will practically showcase the practices which are going on locally. As Stigmata said, I think most of the time we have looked at the foreign and the Western models. And so a time has come for us, as COVID has taught us very well, that no one knows the solution for these things. We've got to come up with our own. So we will be reaching out to you to see what are some of the case studies that we can share locally that we can learn from as members of this local community as we strengthen our resilience, both as individuals, that then by extension lead to organizational resilience. And so with those many remarks, I want to thank all of you, and I wanted to challenge us that let us continue to explore and understand the current trends as we position ourselves strategically to deal and take advantage of the future opportunities that we can see as leaders in this space. So we will be reaching out to all of you, and I want to encourage you once more that if you haven't registered for the session that we are having today, please register so that we are able to get your contacts and keep in touch with you to sustain this conversation and to reach out to you in terms of getting the tool or the guide that we want to develop, so that these conversations go beyond the words and the sessions that we are having today to practical, actionable practices that we can share and use to strengthen the work that we are doing. Thank you so much. Thank you to Taaka, thank you Stigmata, EAPN, APN, and to all of you who have taken time to be part of this session. We appreciate all of you. Asanteni sana.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.